April 1589. Plymouth Harbour is buzzing like a kicked hornet's nest. 180 ships, a fleet so massive it makes Spain's Great Armada look almost modest. 27,000 men, the biggest force England had ever scraped together in its life. And everyone thought this was the killing blow, that Spain was finally going to eat dirt. But what happened over the next 4 months? Christ Almighty, it's one of the darkest and most deliberately buried chapters in British naval history. Because this fleet, this so-called Counter-Armada, didn't come back in glory. Not even close. It limped home with half the men and with more ships lost than Spain suffered in '88. By God, 15,000 dead, 150 ships gone, and our pride in bloody tatters. This is the story of the revenge that never was, of the triumph that turned into sheer humiliation, and how England, with its own bloody hands, gave itself the worst naval thrashing in its entire history. And the best part, they managed to keep almost everyone from ever finding out. Bloody unbelievable. So stick around, because tonight I'm telling you the truth English books preferred to burn. Let's start with the moment it all went straight to their heads. The summer of '88, England couldn't fit in its own skin with joy. The Great Armada, scattered, Spanish galleons smashed to splinters by storms and our guns, and in London they were already handing out medals with that smug little phrase, "God blew," and they were dispersed. Bitter laugh. And they believed it. Christ, they believed it so much, they honestly thought God was on their bloody payroll. In Queen Elizabeth's court, the euphoria was like cheap wine. Goes down easy, fogs the brain, and leaves you blind as a bat. Advisors, admirals, merchants, all parroting the same thing. Spain's broken, one more push, and she's done for good. Voice drops, almost a whisper. What they didn't see was that while they were toasting with warm beer in the shipyards of Santander, Ferrol and Cadiz, the Spanish were welding, caulking, hammering, launching new hulls, day and night. Philip II wasn't on his knees. He was bloody furious, and sitting on coffers full of American silver. And while England was admiring its own naval, convinced it had won the war, Spain was rising, stronger, sharper, ready. That euphoria, that sweet victory hangover, was the deadliest poison they ever drank. Because when you think you're invincible, that's when you start making the biggest mistakes of your life. And the biggest mistake of all was about to sail out of Plymouth with 180 sails flying. 180, sometimes 200 ships, 27,000 men. In raw numbers, the English Counter-Armada was a beast that made the previous year's Great Armada look small. From a distance, it looked unstoppable. Royal Navy galleons, merchant ships armed to the teeth, privateer vessels smelling of gunpowder and stolen gold, all together, painted black and red, crossing the channel like they owned the bloody sea. But if you got close, if you smelled the decks, you saw the cracks. The ships weren't a fleet, they were a bloody barnyard. Some fast, some slow, some with real cannons, others with 4 rusty muskets. The soldiers, an impossible mix. Flanders veterans who knew what real war was, and lads press-ganged in ports who'd never seen the sea until they were shoved aboard. And worst of all, not enough food, water poorly calculated, not a single bloody doctor worth a damn. It was a giant, but a giant with feet of clay, rotten guts. And 2 heads that couldn't agree. An impressive revenge machine, but carrying within it the seeds of its own destruction. And when that machine started moving, nobody, not a single soul, realized it was already broken before it left port. Money. In the end, it all comes down to bloody money. Elizabeth I was clever, but she was tight as a drum. Didn't want to spend crown money, so she set up the expedition like a merchant's venture. The Royal Navy provided the big ships, and the rest, private investors, paid for it. Nobles, merchants, even Drake and Norris put in their own fortunes. And what happens when the payers call the shots? The war stops being war and becomes a bloody treasure hunt. Santander was the military target. Destroy the Spanish fleet in for repairs. That would have been a mortal blow. But Santander had no easy gold. CORUNNA, on the other hand, rich port, full warehouses, easy looting. And the investors back in London were pressing, "We want to see silver soon, or we're ruined." So Drake and Norris, even though they knew it was a massive mistake, bowed to the money. A military expedition turned into a band of pirates in uniform. And when money calls more shots than strategy, defeat is already written, because investors' silver bought ships, bought men, but didn't buy time or discipline or victory. And in the end, it didn't even buy the silver they promised. Bloody hell, what a sad way to lose a war. Two cocks in the same yard. Francis Drake, the legendary privateer, the one who'd stolen Spain's gold and singed the king's beard. And John Norris, a real soldier, one of the poor bastards who knew what it was like to sleep in Flanders mud. One commanded the sea, the other commanded the land, and neither commanded the other. Elizabeth thought it was a good idea. 2 heads are better than 1, she said. Well, yes, 2 heads, and neither could agree. Drake wanted quick attacks, loot, glory, and back home with ships full of gold. Norris wanted bases, supply lines, and to do things properly in a real war. And when the moment of truth came, Drake looked at the sea, Norris looked at the land, and between them both, they lost the bloody war. There was no boss, just 2 egos, and 27,000 men paying the price. That wasn't a fleet. It was a recipe for the greatest English naval disaster of the age, and we hadn't even reached Corunna yet. The real mistake, the real bloody mistake, was made in early May '89. In the War Council, the intelligence reports were right there on the table. Santander, that's where the Spanish galleons are in dry dock, half repaired, barely crewed, almost defenseless. A surprise attack there, and the Spanish Navy would be crippled for years. But Drake and Norris looked at the ships full of sick soldiers, looked at the letters from investors demanding gold now, and looked at Corunna. Rich port, full warehouses, easy looting, and they made the decision. Let's hit Corunna first, grab some silver, shut mouths, then head to Santander. 14 days. 14 bloody days wasted in front of our walls. 14 days during which Spain got the warning, mobilized troops, and in Santander the hammers didn't stop even at night. Every hour they wasted at Corunna was a Spanish ship getting back afloat. Every English soldier falling sick in front of our city was a Spanish sailor saving his life. And when they finally lifted the siege and slunk away with their tails between their legs, Santander was ready to receive them. That detour, that greed dressed as tactics, was the knife they stuck in their own chest. And they still thought they could win the war. Bloody hell, what blindness. May 4th, 1589. The English arrived in our bay, 180 ships blotting out the horizon, and they thought Corunna would be a walkover. First they took the fish market, the lower town, looted what they wanted, and already thought they owned the place. But when they tried to climb to the upper town, that's when they met real Galicia. Men, women, kids, all to the walls. With whatever they had, spears, stones, boiling pots of water, and María Pita up front, screaming, spear in hand, and her husband dead at her feet. 14 days. 14 days pounding against walls that didn't even have half the cannons needed. Drake watching from the ships and unable to do a damn thing. And meanwhile, dysentery was already eating them alive in their shitty camps. May 18th, they lifted the siege, with thousands dead, with their best officers buried in our soil, and without touching a single ship from the Santander fleet. Corunna didn't fall, and that quick detour for loot became the grave of their entire campaign. Because here, in our bay, they learned the hard way that Galicia doesn't surrender. Not then, nor ever. Bloody hell, what a lesson we gave them. While Drake and Norris argued over maps and loot, an enemy far more ruthless than any Spaniard was eating the fleet from the inside. Disease. Picture the scene, for Christ's sake. 300 men crammed into a ship built for half, decks covered in shit and vomit. Rotten water. Lice fat as bloody chickpeas. Dysentery hit first, then typhus. And after that, there was no after. The surviving logbooks say it straight, men too weak to even handle the sails. Bodies thrown between cannons, the smell was so strong it soaked into the wood forever. And the surgeons, those poor bastards with saws in hand and humoral theory in their heads, hadn't a bloody clue what to do. Bleedings, purges, herbal brews, and in the end, another body to the sea. Listen to the numbers, they hurt. Of all who died in that campaign, only 1 in 8 fell to bullet or spear. The other 7 were killed by shit in their guts and lice in their clothes. 10,000, 12,000, 13,000 dead, more than in all the battles of the war combined. Disease wasn't collateral damage, it was the chief executioner. And the worst part, it was all written from the day they sailed without a decent sanitary plan. Because in real war, logistics kills long before the cannons do. Lisbon, the big prize, the moment when everything had to be decided. Late May 1589. Norris lands north of the Tagus with what was left of his army, sick men, cripples, half-starved. And he waits for Drake to come up the river with the whole fleet to squeeze Lisbon from both sides. But Drake stayed outside, looking at the Spanish forts from afar, smelling the wind, and decided it wasn't worth risking his precious ships. Whether it was fear or calculation, doesn't matter. The fact is, he left Norris hanging, alone, without naval support, without easy retreat. And Lisbon wasn't Corunna. Here there was no quick looting. Here there were real walls, well-placed Spanish cannons, and a people who wanted nothing to do with Don Antonio or the English. The assaults were a slaughterhouse, men fell like flies. And the disease finished the job. When Norris finally crawled back to the ships, there was no army left. Just a handful of ghosts with lost looks and bodies full of shit. Lisbon was the final nail in the coffin. That's where the Counter-Armada ceased to exist as a fighting force and became a procession of dying men who just wanted to get home, if there was still a home to return to. Now, the numbers. The real numbers. The ones England hid for centuries. Of the 27,000 who sailed, only 12 to 15,000 came back. 15,000 dead or more. And listen to me, for Christ's sake. Of those 15,000, only 1,500 or 2,000 fell fighting. The other 13,000 were killed by shit in their bellies and lice in their clothes. 8 dead from disease, for everyone who died with a bullet inside. Of the 180 ships that left Plymouth, only 30 came back whole. 150 sunk, abandoned, burned or captured. More ships lost than Spain left on our shores the year before. And the money, the investors who'd put their fortunes in, went bust. Ships, houses, titles, all to bloody hell. And when the few survivors staggered into English ports, there were no bells, no medals, just silence, and a smell of death that took years to fade. These are the real figures, not the ones English books tell. These are the ones that hurt, and these are the ones I'm telling you today. While England was burying its dead in silence, here we didn't stop for a single day. The English thought they'd left us crippled. But what they did without meaning to was give us the greatest gift of all, time. 14 days outside Corunna were 14 days of pure gold for Philip II. In Santander, in Ferrol, in Cadiz, the hammers never stopped. The galleons broken in 88 were being welded day and night, and they weren't the same slow ships anymore. Now they were lower, faster, with more long-range cannons. We learned the English lesson and made it our own. The silver kept coming from America, the tercios kept coming from Flanders, and Spanish shipyards were spitting out new ships like the 88 Armada had been just a bad dream. When the English finally slunk away with their tails between their legs, the Spanish Navy wasn't dead. It was more alive and more pissed off than ever. And that's how the real war began. 15 more years of Spanish galleons crossing the Atlantic and making England tremble, because Spain doesn't surrender, it rises. And when it rises stronger. That's what they learned the hard way in '89, and it still hurts them to remember it. Summer of '89. The few remaining ships limp into Plymouth and Dartmouth. Empty decks, smell of death. And in London, the big problem. How the bloody hell do you explain this after a year of saying we were invincible? The solution was simple and masterful. Lie. Lie big. First, blame the weather. Terrible storms, what can you do? Second, blame the Portuguese. They promised to rise up and betrayed us. Third, inflate the looting of Corunna's lower town like it was an epic victory. And fourth, most important, hide the real numbers. 15,000 dead, some unfortunate fevers. 150 ships lost, minor damage. And Drake and Norris, they were sidelined for a bit, but never judged publicly, because judging them would mean admitting the shame. For centuries, English books talked about the Great Spanish Armada as the Great Defeat, and the Counter-Armada as an expedition that didn't go quite as well as we'd hoped. Full stop. And it worked. Bloody hell. For 400 years, almost nobody outside Spain knew the truth. England's greatest naval disaster became a footnote, because history isn't written just by the victors, it's written by those who control the ink and know when to shut up. And the English, they were bloody artists at that. 436 years later, the Counter-Armada still whispers the same thing, and it whispers it loud. That a great victory can blind you more than any defeat. That when you think you're invincible, that's when you really start to lose. That private money should never run a war. That without one boss, no army's worth a damn. That logistics kills more than cannons. And that history is written by those who know when to shut up and when to tell it. This disaster isn't just sunken ships or 15,000 nameless graves. It's a mirror, an old mirror, full of cracks, but one that still reflects perfectly. And in that mirror, any power today can see its face if it dares to look, because arrogance always smells the same: salt air, gunpowder, and rotten pride. The Counter-Armada wasn't an English defeat. It was a warning, and 4 centuries later, the warning still stands. If this story moved something inside you, if you want to keep uncovering chapters that official books prefer to bury, hit subscribe. For you, it's one click. For us, it's the air that keeps us alive, to keep bringing you the truth even when it hurts. Chronicles Unusual, because some stories don't tell themselves. See you at the next port, and may the sea be kind to you.